We all want answers, don't we? Especially when, powerful people are involved in really dark things. But what happens when the system, the one meant for justice, actually seems to keep those answers hidden? Today, we're doing a deep dive into that whole world around Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Specifically, we're looking at this intense public demand for transparency, for everything to come out, and how that clashes really head-on with the long history of secrecy around grand juries.
Yeah, it's a real clash. And for this dive, we've gathered, well, quite a stack of documents for you. We've got reports explaining how grand juries work, news articles capturing the public reaction, the political side of things.
Yeah.
Our goal really is to unpack all these layers, to figure out why some records stay sealed and what the real-world effects are of this fight for information. We want to help you understand what people are actually asking for and why the official story often feels, well, incomplete to so many.
And you'll find out some pretty surprising reasons behind why grand juries are secret in the first place. We'll look at how this whole case has set off political fireworks, across the board, and why some big names are finding it, let's say, hard to put the genie back in the bottle now. Okay, let's get into it. So the core of what the public wants, it seems, is what everyone calls the Epstein Files.
Mm-hmm.
There's this huge push, you hear it everywhere, for the entire 300,000 pages supposedly collected by the FBI. People want the financials too, thinking that would really show what was taking place. And, of course, the idea of a client list. Mm-hmm. The belief is that this stuff would give the full picture way beyond what's been released.
Exactly. And that desire, it's understandable, right? People want the whole story. But what sometimes gets missed is what the Justice Department, the DOJ, actually offered. They went to court, formally urging judges to release specific grand jury transcripts.
Yeah.
For both Epstein and Maxwell. They cited transparency to the American public as the reason. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche was pushing for this.
Okay, so the DOJ says transparency offers grand jury transcripts. But then you get this reaction, sometimes quite strong, saying things like, more distraction, that's not what the public wants.
Mm.
Or, we don't want grand jury info, we want the 300K pages. Mm. So why? Why this huge gap? Is it just people not understanding the legal side, or is something else going on?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And a lot of it boils down to what a grand jury is and what it isn't. It's fundamentally limited. First off, who testifies? Usually just one or two law enforcement people. An FBI agent, maybe an NYPD officer. In Epstein's case, for instance, the indictment, only one FBI agent testified to that grand jury.
Just one agent.
Just one. And second, what do they testify about? Often they're relaying statements of other people, including victims. That's hearsay. Now, hearsay is okay in a grand jury setting, totally allowed. But you generally can't use it like that in a criminal trial.
Okay. Big difference.
Huge difference. And third, maybe the biggest point. Prosecutors in a grand jury. They're usually just trying to show enough evidence to get an indictment, to establish probable cause. They are not laying out the entire investigation, not even close. That full investigation might have, like you said, thousands of pages, documents, financials, travel logs, photos, computer data. None of that is typically in the grand jury transcript itself. It's more like the executive summary, not the full report.
So it's like expecting a feature film and getting just the trailer.
Kind of, yeah. A legally necessary trailer, but still just a trailer.
Which explains the frustration. The public wants the deep dive, the full archive. But the legal system offers this very specific, narrow window. And that gap, well, that's where the mistrust grows, right? Okay, so let's dig into that secrecy itself. The grand jury. What exactly is it? How is it different from the trial jury we see on TV?
Right, so the basics. A grand jury decides if there's probable cause, enough evidence to formally charge someone with a crime, to issue an indictment. A trial jury, the one you see in courtrooms, decides actual guilt or innocence after hearing all the evidence from both sides. And the absolutely critical difference, grand jury stuff happens in secret. Trials are generally public.
Secret. And that's not new, is it?
Not at all. This secrecy is ancient, legally speaking. It goes back centuries. Recognized in the Magna Carta way back in 1215. It's even in the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment. It's an old English tradition the American colonists brought over. And they used it. Think about John Zenger in 1735. The colonial governor wanted him indicted for libel. The grand jury just said no, flat out refused. That shows the core idea. They're meant to be independent. They can indict or not indict regardless of what a judge or prosecutor wants.
Independent and secret. So why the secrecy? You mentioned the Handbook for Federal Grand Jurors. What reasons does it give? It must be more than just tradition.
Oh, absolutely. There are very practical reasons laid out. First, it protects the grand jurors themselves. Keeps them free from pressure or even threats from people being investigated. Makes sense. Right?
Yeah.
Second, it prevents suspects from finding out they're about to be indicted and, maybe fleeing. Third, it helps prevent tampering with witnesses or intimidating them before a potential trial. Fourth, and this is important, it encourages witnesses to testify fully and truthfully without fear of immediate reprisal or public exposure. And finally, it protects people who are investigated but not ultimately indicted. It avoids public shame or suspicion for someone who hasn't actually been charged with anything.
Okay. Those are,
Yeah.
those are pretty compelling reasons when you lay them out like that. Protection all around, basically.
Exactly. And the rules about who can even be in the grand jury room are incredibly strict because of this. When evidence is presented, it's just the jurors, the prosecutor, the witness who's testifying, a court reporter, and maybe an interpreter. That's it. And when they deliberate and vote, only the jurors, period. Maybe an interpreter if needed for a juror, but no one else. If anyone else is in there during deliberations or voting, prosecutor, judge, anyone can actually nullify the indictment.
Wow. So the secrecy is ironclad.
It's meant to be.
Yeah.
Jurors take an oath of secrecy. They can't discuss it with friends, family, spouses, not during, not after. They can generally only disclose things to prosecutors as needed for their official duties, but not the deliberations or the vote counts. Unless, and this is the key exception, a court orders disclosure in the interests of justice.
Which brings us back to Epstein and Maxwell. The DOJ asked for that exception, citing transparency, but the judges said no, both in New York and Florida.
Correct. Judge Rosenberg in Florida said the request didn't meet the high bar of extraordinary exceptions. And Judge Engelmayer in New York denied Maxwell's own request for her transcripts, finding no compelling necessity.
So even with the DOJ pushing, the courts upheld that secrecy principle. Really shows how strong it is. And of course, this legal back and forth didn't happen in a vacuum. It spilled out big time into the political arena. This whole Epstein Files thing, the secrecy, the conflicting statements, it just fueled this massive public distrust, didn't it? You hear constant talk about a potential conspiracy to protect Epstein's clients or hide evidence like videos.
Absolutely. And it created a really tricky situation, a sort of boomerang effect, particularly for former President Trump, according to some analyses we looked at. Sources suggest he spent years promoting ideas about a deep state, casting himself as the one who could expose it all. But then, when his own supporters demanded he deliver the full Epstein story, the answers weren't forthcoming in the way they expected, or perhaps couldn't be.
Right. The narrative he built kind of came back around.
In a way, yeah. When the DOJ and FBI stated publicly, there was no client list per se, and no more files were coming. There was, according to reports, immense backlash from many of his supporters. People called him out of touch, accused the government of a hoax or cover-up. Trump himself then tried to push back, suggesting the focus on Epstein was maybe a radical left-inspired distraction undermining his administration. He reportedly even said it was all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein.
It shows that tension, doesn't it? Between firing up a base with promises of revealing secrets and then navigating the complexities of actual government process.
Definitely. And it wasn't just him. Other figures got drawn in. Remember Pam Bondi? Initially, she made comments suggesting an Epstein client list was practically sitting on her desk.
Right.
Later, she had to clarify she meant the general case file. That walkback led to calls for her resignation from some corners, like Laura Loomer.
Yeah, I remember that.
And there were reports of internal feuding, a supposed tense exchange between Bondi as Attorney General and FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino over it all. Critics were saying officials were just off chasing rabbits.
And then there are the reports about Trump's name appearing in the files?
Yes. Reports surfaced saying his name was among many in the Epstein Files.
Mm-hmm.
And there was testimony from a survivor, Virginia Giuffre, who said she met him when she was 14, though she tragically died recently. Trump has publicly denied involvement, suggesting his name might have been planted or that a birthday letter found was a forgery.
So a lot of accusations, denials, political infighting.
Exactly. And politically, this kind of situation, regardless of the administration, becomes a potentially costly distraction. It really highlights how public anger can build when transparency promises, even if made with good intentions, don't align with what the public expects to see, especially in a case this disturbing.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together. For you listening, trying to make sense of it all, what's the takeaway? We've got this deep-seated legal tradition clashing hard with a very modern, very intense public demand for total openness.
Yeah, that's the core conflict right there. The legal system's need for grand jury secrecy, which, as we saw, has real reasons behind it. Protecting people, ensuring witness testimony is just fundamentally at odds with a public that is understandably desperate for every detail, especially with crimes as horrific involving powerful people. It's a system built for, let's say, careful step-by-step process versus a public wanting the floodgates opened immediately.
And just to recap those key points for you, grand jury records. They're limited. They are not the whole investigation file. By design, judges protect that secrecy fiercely. Release is rare, needing extraordinary circumstances. And politicians tapping into that public demand for transparency. They can find themselves in a tough spot, that boomerang effect, if the reality doesn't match the rhetoric.
And contextually, Ghislaine Maxwell, she's serving a 20-year sentence. Scheduled release is 2037. And as mentioned, Virginia Giuffre, a central accuser in the wider story, sadly died by suicide earlier this year, in April 2025. The core facts, the abuse, the convictions of Epstein before his death, and Maxwell, those are established. But that bigger picture, who else knew? Who else was involved beyond Maxwell? That remains murky, obscured by legal secrecy on one side and swirling public narratives on the other.
Which leaves us with this really interesting thought, maybe a paradox. If grand jury secrecy is supposed to ensure justice and protect people, does the huge public distrust it creates in cases like this actually end up undermining faith in the whole justice system?
That's a profound question to wrestle with, isn't it? As these calls for full transparency keep getting louder, how do we balance that? How do we balance the legitimate, practical needs for confidentiality within the legal system against the public's right, or at least desire, to know everything? Especially when secrecy itself seems to breed suspicion, and for many, a conviction that there's an ongoing cover-up. It's a question that isn't going away anytime soon. It's shaping politics, shaping how we think about accountability,